The air didn't just vibrate, it tore. Flight Lieutenant Bluey Johnston was pulling 6 Gs, and his aircraft was telling him to stop. The entire airframe of his RAF P-40E Kittyhawk, serial number A29133, screamed in protest. The heavy Lawson engine, roaring at full combat power, felt like it was trying to rip itself free from the mounts. His vision narrowed to a gray tunnel as the blood drained from his head. His face a grotesque mask pulled taut by the turn. Outside his canopy, 8,000 feet above the jungle-choked misery of Milne Bay, was the enemy. "He's on me! He's on me! Break right, Bluey!" The voice in his headset was thin and reedy, distorted by static and terror. It was his wingman, a fresh-faced kid from Adelaide named Peters. Bluey didn't need the warning. He could see the Zero. It was a ghostly, almost delicate thing, painted in a pale gray-green that mocked the jungle below, and it was turning inside him, effortlessly. "I can't shake him!" Peters shrieked. Bluey hauled back on the spade gripstick with both hands, his muscles screaming. The Kittyhawk was a brawler. It was tough, packed 650 caliber MGs, and could dive like a streamlined brick. But it couldn't turn. Turning was for the Zeros. Turning was suicide. The RAAF doctrine, hammered into them by their squadron leader, was inflexible. Boom and zoom, never ever turn with a Zero. But Peters had turned. The kid had panicked, seen a target of opportunity, and pulled into a dogfight. Now he was paying for it. The Zero, a Mitsubishi A6M flown by a pilot from the elite Tainan Air Group, was a scalpel. It slid onto Peters's 6, its movements more like a butterfly's than a 2-ton war machine. Bluey watched in cinematic horror as the first tracers, a lazy, beautiful, terrifying stream of 7.7mm rounds, reached out. "Dive, Peters! Dive!" Bluey yelled, pushing his own nose down to gain speed, to execute the one maneuver he was allowed. Thok, thok, thok. A different sound, not Peters's guns, not the Zeros, his. A second Zero, unseen, had dropped from the sun. Cannons, 20mm. The rounds didn't just hit Bluey's plane, they exploded. One punched through the port wing, blowing a hole the size of a dinner plate. Another struck the fuselage just behind his armored seat, and the entire cockpit filled with the acrid stench of cordite and glycol. The stick went dead in his hands for a half-second, then kicked back with violent life. Bugger! He was hit. Badly. The Zero flashed past his canopy, its red Hinomaru, the meatball, burning an after-image into his retina. The Japanese pilot glanced over, a flicker of a white scarf, before peeling away to find an easier kill. He didn't even need to finish the job. A Kittyhawk this damaged, this far over the jungle, was already a ghost. Bluey jammed the throttle forward. He was losing hydraulic pressure. The green, endless carpet of the Owen Stanley Mountains loomed below. He was too low to bail, too damaged to fight. Mayday, mayday. A29133, hit bad. Trying for Gurney strip, trying for Gurney. On the ground, standing by a fuel bowser half sunk in the black volcanic mud of Gurney Field, Sergeant Jack Ticker Voss heard the call over the field radio. He didn't look up. He just closed his eyes, his knuckles white on the brass nozzle of the fuel hose. He was already listening to Bluey's engine note. The Allison was rough, misfiring. Voss, the chief mechanic for 75 Squadron, was a man who understood machines better than men. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the machine was dying. He watched the smoke trail descend from the clouds. He counted the seconds, listening to the desperate, failing rhythm of the engine. He watched another one of his boys, wrapped in one of his beautifully tuned machines, fall out of the sky simply because he couldn't turn. And for the first time in his quiet, methodical life, Jack Voss felt a cold, analytical rage. "It's not the bloody pilots," he muttered to the mud. "It's the plane, and I'm going to fix it." Milne Bay, Allied Forward Base, August 27, 1942. To understand the miracle that was about to happen at Milne Bay, one first had to understand the despair. This was not Europe. This was not North Africa. This was the arse end of the world. By August 1942, the Empire of Japan was a tidal wave of conquest. Singapore had fallen. The Philippines had fallen. The Dutch East Indies were gone. The seemingly invincible Japanese war machine was now lapping at the shores of Australia itself, having bombed Darwin into rubble. The linchpin was New Guinea. If the Japanese took Port Moresby, they would have a knife at Australia's throat. The only thing stopping them was a desperate, muddy, malaria-ridden beachhead at the very eastern tip of the island, Milne Bay. It was here that the Allies had frantically carved 3 airstrips from the jungle and swamp, Guinea, Turnbull, and Number 3. The runways were made of pierced steel planking, PSP, a metal lattice that was the only thing preventing the aircraft from sinking into the primordial ooze. When it rained, which was always, the strips were lakes of black water. And into this apocalyptic outpost, the RAF had thrown 2 squadrons of P-40E Kittyhawks, 75 and 76 squadrons. The problem was the enemy. Flying from their bases at Rabaul, the Japanese Navy sent the Tainan Air Group. This was the unit of aces, men like Saburo Sakai, flying the single most dominant fighter aircraft the world had yet seen, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero. The confrontation was a tactical nightmare. The Zero, it weighed just 5,500 pounds fully loaded. Its wing loading, the amount of weight each square foot of wing had to support, was phenomenally low. This meant it could generate immense lift at low speeds. It could climb like a rocket and turn on a sixpence. Its weakness was its construction. It had no armor for the pilot and no self-sealing fuel tanks. It was a sports car made of paper, the Kittyhawk. It was a beast. At 8,500 pounds, it was a heavyweight. It was brutally tough, had armor plate behind the pilot and self-sealing tanks. Its Allison engine was supercharged for medium altitudes, and its 650 caliber machine guns could chew a Zero to pieces in a 1-second burst. The tactical equation was simple. If the Kittyhawk was above the Zero in diving, the Kittyhawk won. If the Zero got behind the Kittyhawk, or if the P-40 pilot was foolish enough to engage in a turning dogfight, the Kittyhawk lost. Every single time. The RAF pilots were trained in the boom and zoom, dive from a height advantage, fire, and use the P-40's superior weight and speed to climb away, resetting for another pass. But Milne Bay was a low-altitude fight, fought in the clouds and rain over the landing beaches. There was often no height advantage. The Zeros, taking off from Buna, would arrive and orbit, goading the Australians into a fight they couldn't win. The Kittyhawks had to engage, or the Japanese bombers and landing craft would be unmolested. The stakes were absolute. If the RAF lost control of the air over Milne Bay, the Japanese ground forces, already landing on the coast, would overrun the Australian infantry. The base would fall, New Guinea would fall, and Australia would be next. Gurney Field, the Boneyard, August 29th, 1942, 19:04 hours. The Boneyard was Jack Voss's kingdom. It was a clearing at the far end of the runway, piled high with the carcasses of dead Kittyhawks. Here, a wing. There, a shattered propeller blade. The tail section of A-29-111, its RAAF roundel pockmarked with 7.7mm holes, jutted from the mud like a tombstone. This was where Bluey Johnston's crippled A-29-133 had finally come to rest. Its landing gear collapsed, its belly torn open by the rough landing. Bluey had survived, with a broken arm and a concussion, but his plane was finished. The routine was now sickeningly familiar. A scramble, a desperate fight. The inevitable frantic calls of "Zero on my 6." Then the silence. Or worse, the smoke trails. In the squadron briefing hut, a thatched roof hovel buzzing with mosquitoes, squadron leader Keith "Bluey" Truscott, a different Bluey and a famous ace, slammed his fist on the map table. "I will not say it again," Truscott seethed, his face slick with sweat. "If you turn, you die. If you see a Zero, you dive. Is that clear? We are losing planes we cannot replace, and we are losing pilots I will not replace." A young pilot, his face pale and blotchy with infected mosquito bites, spoke up. "Sir, they're not just waiting for us up high. They're coming down, scissoring with us. They know our rules. They get on our 6 and we can't dive, or they'll follow us right down to the treetops." "Then you weave," Truscott shot back, referring to the thatch weave, a new American tactic where 2 planes crossed paths to cover each other's tail. "It's not working, sir," the pilot retorted, his voice cracking. "We weave, they just climb above us and wait. They have all the time in the world. We're fighting their fight, and we're dying for it." The hut fell silent. The oppressive wet heat seemed to suck the very air from their lungs. The pilots were exhausted, terrified, and simmering with a frustration that was eating them alive. Later that night, Jack Voss was in the boneyard, working by the light of a single guttering hurricane lamp. He wasn't just salvaging parts, he was performing an autopsy. With a set of calipers and a grease pencil, he was measuring the bullet holes. He found the same pattern on every wreck. Not a scatter shot, but a precise, surgical line of holes stitching across the fuselage, just behind the cockpit, or along the root of the port wing. The Japanese pilots were so good, and had so much time to aim, they weren't just hosing their targets, they were executing them. He climbed into the cockpit of Bluey's wrecked 133. The air inside was thick with the smell of spilled hydraulic fluid and mold. He grabbed the stick and pulled it back. It moved easily, clunking against the rear stop. The elevator flaps on the tail, connected by cables, dutifully rose, but Voss was imagining it at 300 knots. He was imagining the wall of air pressure pushing against that elevator. He knew, from talking to the pilots, that in a high-speed turn, the stick felt like it was set in concrete. The pilot had to fight the G-forces and the plane's own stability just to keep the nose up. The Zero, being light, had no such problem. Voss sat in the darkness, the jungle hissing and clicking around him. He wasn't an engineer. He wasn't a pilot. He was a mechanic from Goulburn, New South Wales, who used to tune racing engines. But he understood one thing: leverage. The plane wasn't the problem. The leverage was the problem. The pilot simply didn't have the strength to force the plane to do what it was aerodynamically capable of doing. "You're fighting the wind," he whispered to the dead instrument panel. What if you made the wind fight for you?" Jack, Ticker Voss, was not a typical RAF sergeant. He was lanky, quiet, and had a pair of oversized ears that seemed to pick up frequencies no one else could. He earned his nickname Ticker because he could walk down a line of idling Kittyhawks and diagnose a faulty magneto or a sticky valve just by the rhythm of the engine. To him, an Lawson V1710 wasn't a hunk of metal. It was a living thing with a temperament. His mind worked in systems. Back in Goulburn, he'd built a shearing machine out of a busted motorcycle engine and a bicycle chain. He saw the world not as a collection of objects, but as a series of interconnected levers, gears, and pressures. Now, sitting in the boneyard, the system he was analyzing was control and effect. Problem: pilot pulls stick, stick pulls cable, cable pulls elevator, plane pitches up. Complication: at high speed, wind pressure on the elevator is immense, pushing back. Pilot must overcome this pressure with brute force. Result: pilot cannot pull hard enough. The P-40's turn is wide and slow. It bleeds energy. The Zero has low pressure, easy controls. It turns. Voss looked at the tail. The elevator was the big moving surface, but on the back edge of the elevator was a second, smaller flap, the trim tab. In any aircraft, the trim tab was the pilot's friend. It was a tiny flap moved by a small wheel in the cockpit. The pilot would use it to counteract the engine's torque or to hold the plane level, trimming it so he didn't have to constantly push on the stick. It was a fine-tuning tool, a convenience. Voss's mind made the jump. He was staring at the trim tab, but he wasn't seeing a trim tab. He was seeing a servo tab. What if, he said aloud to the mosquitoes, it didn't just trim? What if it boosted? His idea was beautifully simple. It was also completely insane and violated every rule of aeronautical design. He would disconnect the trim tab from the pilot's trim wheel. He would weld a new, simple metal horn onto the tab's linkage. Then, he would run a new, short push rod from that horn directly to the stationary part of the tailplane. The result? When the pilot pulled the stick back, the elevator would start to go up. But as it moved, the new push rod would force the trim tab to deflect down into the airstream. At 300 knots, the wind would hit that small, downward-facing tab like a hammer. This force would push the entire elevator up with massive, leveraged power. It was power steering. It was a hydraulic ram, powered by the wind itself. The pilot would still pull the stick, but his small effort would now be amplified tenfold by the tab. The concrete stick would suddenly feel light. The plane would have to turn, and turn hard. He grabbed a piece of salvaged aluminum panel and, using the greasy tip of a .50 caliber round, he scratched out the design. A new horn, a new rod, 2 new holes. It was a patch, a crazy patch. It would take him maybe 3 hours. He looked at the wreck of A29-133. It was a write-off. No one would miss its tail. Gurney Field, maintenance tents. August 30th, 1942, 07:21. Hours Voss walked his scratched-up diagram into the maintenance tent and showed it to his superior, Flight Sergeant Ewan Digger Malone. Malone, a career RAF man with a face like a worn boot, looked at the diagram, then at Voss. He said, "Jack, have you gone troppo? The malaria finally got you?" "It'll work, Digger. It's just leverage." "It's just suicide," Malone snorted, tossing the metal sheet onto a workbench. "You're changing the control surfaces. You know who does that? Engineers. At the Curtiss Wright factory. In America. Not a grease monkey in a mud hole." "The engineers aren't here," Voss said, his voice quiet. "And a good thing, too. You do this, you know what happens? The pilot pulls the stick, your booster kicks in, and the whole bloody tail rips right off the fuselage. You'll kill him faster than the Japs." "It won't," Voss insisted. "The airframe can take it. It's rated for 7 Gs. The pilots are only pulling 4 or 5 before the stick loads up. This just lets them use the Gs the plane already has." "No," Malone said, final. "I've got 3 flyable birds left, and I need you tuning their engines, not inventing ways to crash them. Get back to work." Voss stood there for a moment. He was an enlisted man. That was an order. He nodded, picked up his diagram, and walked out into the incessant, miserable rain. He was halfway to the engine pools when a voice called out, "Sergeant!" It was Flight Lieutenant Bluey Johnston. His arm was in a sling, his face a patchwork of purple bruises from his crash. "I heard the chat with Digger," Bluey said, lowering his voice. "He reckons you'll rip the tail off." "He's wrong," Voss said. Bluey looked at the mud, then at the boneyard, then back to Voss. He was a pilot who had felt the zero on his tail. He had lived the failure. "My old bird," Bluey said, nodding toward the wreck of 133. "She's a write-off, yeah? Slated for spares." "That's right," Voss said, his eyes narrowing. "So, if a man was to, say, salvage the elevator assembly for testing, no one would really notice. And if she did break, well, she's already broken." A slow grin spread across Jack Voss's face. "I'll need the welding torch from the armorer's tent," Voss said. "Get to it," Bluey replied. "And Jack, don't tell the squadron leader." The boneyard, August 30th, 1942, 23 hours. The jungle at night was a solid wall of sound. Under the cover of a torrential downpour, Voss and a young corporal he trusted, Sparrow McGee, worked by the shielded light of a single bulb powered by a portable generator. The work was filthy, precise, and rebellious. First, they unbolted the entire elevator from the tail of A29-133. The thing was heavy, a fabric and metal control surface nearly 10 feet wide. They hauled it into a canvas tent, propping it up on empty fuel drums. "Right," Voss said, his voice barely a whisper over the rain. "Get me the drill." The smell of ozone from the welding torch mixed with the stench of mud and rotting canvas. Voss, his face protected by a cracked visor, carefully welded a small triangular piece of steel, a new control horn, to the base of the trim tab's torque tube. The blue-white light illuminated the tent in ghostly, flickering flashes. "Hold it steady, Sparrow. Steady." Next, the pushrod. Voss had salvaged it from the wreckage of a Wirraway, an old Australian trainer. It was hollow, light, and strong. He sawed it to the precise length he'd calculated on his diagram, 14 inches. The geometry had to be perfect. If the rod was too long, the boost would be too weak. Too short, and the control would be murderously twitchy. A state pilot's called flying the ragged edge. Scrape, file, measure, scrape. He filed the ends, drilled the holes, and fitted the rod with bearings greased with thick black lubricant. One end attached to the tail's fixed rear spar. The other, to his new control horn on the trim tab. They reattached the elevator. Voss stood back, wiping sweat and rain from his face. He moved the elevator up by hand. As it rose, the new rod pivoted, forcing the trim tab down. He pushed the elevator down. The tab snapped up. "Bloody hell, Ticker," Sparrow whispered, his eyes wide. "It works." "On the ground," Voss said, his voice flat. He felt a knot of dread in his stomach. Malone's voice was in his head. "You'll kill him." They needed a plane, and they needed a pilot. Bluey Johnston, sling and all, appeared in the tent opening. "She's a beauty, Jack. Now put it on a real plane. The CO will have my stripes." "The CO isn't here," Bluey said. "He's at the officers' mess with a visiting American, and my new plane, A29-150, is sitting at the end of the strip. She's developed a rough idol. You need to take a look." It was the perfect excuse. A29-150 was scheduled for a dawn patrol. For the next 3 hours, Voss and Sparrow, soaked to the bone, performed a tail transplant in the dark. They swapped the Voss tab elevator onto Bluey's new Kittyhawk. By 04:00, the job was done. The modification was invisible. Unless you knew exactly what to look for, 150 looked like any other P-40 on the line. Guinea Field, August 31st, 1942, 06:05. Hours dawn at Milne Bay was a smear of gray light. The air was cool, the mud thick. Bluey Johnston, his sling conspicuously absent, signed out for his patrol. Squadron leader Truscott was still asleep. "Morning, Sergeant," Bluey said to Voss, who was performing a final check. "She's sensitive, sir," Voss said, his voice low and tight with anxiety. Don't just haul back on it. Squeeze it. Feel it out." "Righto, Jack. Squeeze. Got it." Bluey climbed in. Voss and Sparrow stood back, two lonely figures by the runway, their stomachs in knots. The Allison engine caught with a cough of blue smoke and settled into a throaty, perfect roar. The P-40 thundered down the PSP runway, throwing up plumes of water, and climbed into the low clouds. "He's up," Sparrow breathed. "Now we wait," Voss said. 8,000 feet above Guinea, Bluey leveled off. He was alone. The sky was his. He checked his 6. "Clear." "All right, you beautiful bastard," he whispered to the instrument panel. "Let's see what Ticker's done to you." He dropped the nose, built up speed to 280 knots. Standard patrol cruise. He pulled the stick back gently. The plane responded normally. He pushed the nose over again, this time to 320 knots. Now, he braced himself and pulled back into a hard 4G climbing turn, expecting the familiar concrete-like resistance. It wasn't there. The stick moved. It wasn't light. It was still heavy, alive. But the wall of pressure was gone. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The G-forces didn't build. They slammed into him. His body was crushed into the seat. The world outside the canopy vanished into a gray-green blur. The plane, instead of mushing and bleeding speed, felt like it had been hooked to a steel cable and spun around a giant pivot. He grunted, fighting to stay conscious. The turn was so tight, the P-40 shuddered on the verge of a high-speed stall. He leveled out, his heart hammering. He was breathing hard. Holy Mother of God. He tried it again. A split S. A hard G loop. The plane did things a Kittyhawk had no right to do. It danced. It carved. It turned. He grabbed the radio mic. "Voss, you there?" Voss was in the radio tent, listening on the squadron frequency. "I'm here, sir." "Jack, you bloody magician. It works. It's a bloody miracle. I can, wait. Bogies. 10 o'clock high." Voss's blood ran cold. "Sir, get out of there. Test is over." "2 of them, Jack." Bluey's voice was different now. Not excited. Cold. Predatory. "Looks like they're heading for the strip. I'm going to say g'day." "Bluey, no. You're alone." "Not today, Jack. Not today." Bluey firewalled the throttle, climbing for the sun. The 2 Zeros, confident, arrogant, dropped down to begin their strafing run on the field. They hadn't seen him. Bluey came down on them like a thunderbolt. Boom and zoom. The first part of the plan never changed. His 650 calibers ripped the air apart. The lead Zero, caught completely by surprise, evaporated in a cloud of debris. The second Zero, horrified, did the only thing it knew how to do. It broke hard left, pulling up into an impossible climbing turn, expecting the P-40 to sail past. A clumsy fool. Bluey did not sail past. He broke with the Zero. He hauled back on the stick, engaging the Voss tab. The G's hit him, but he was ready. He grunted, strained, and pulled. For the first time in the history of the Pacific War, a P-40 was turning inside an A6M Zero. The Japanese pilot must have thought he was insane. He could see the Australian plane, a shark in the water, matching his every move, gaining on him. Bluey held the trigger down. The P-40 shuddered, the guns hammering. He watched his tracers walk across the Zero's fuselage and into the engine. The Zero's prop stopped. It nosed over, trailing smoke, and plunged straight into the jungle. 2 Zeros. 10 seconds. Bluey Johnston flew back to Guinea, performed a perfect victory roll over the strip, and landed. He taxied to a halt, and before the prop had even stopped spinning, Squadron Leader Truscott was on his wing, his face purple with rage. "Johnston! What in the goddamn hell was that? You broke formation, you engaged alone, and... Bluey pulled his helmet off. He was grinning from ear to ear. "2 of them, sir, and I turned with them." Truscott stopped. "You what?" "I turned with them," Bluey said, pointing a shaking finger at Jack Voss, who was walking slowly toward the plane. "And Sergeant Voss here is the reason why." Milne Bay, Allied Perimeter, September 4th, 1942, 11:30 hours. The Japanese were desperate. Their ground offensive at Milne Bay had bogged down in a sea of mud and ferocious Australian infantry. They needed to break the stalemate, and that meant one last, all-out air attack. The RAAF radar plotters saw them coming. 12 Betty bombers escorted by 20 Zeros. It was the largest raid to date. On Gurney Field, 12 Kittyhawks roared to life. 6 of them, including Bluey Johnston's, were now fitted with the Voss tab. The other 6 were standard. Squadron Leader Truscott, now a believer, gave a chillingly simple briefing. "You 6, he pointed to the standard birds. "You are the bait. Fly high, boom and zoom, drag them down. You 6, he pointed to Voss's modified flight. "You are the killers. Go with them. Wait until they commit. Then, show them what a bloody Kittyhawk can do." The RAAF climbed to 15,000 feet, angels in the clear sky above the perpetual Milne Bay clouds. The Japanese arrived. The fight was joined. It began as it always did. The Zeros, seeing the P-40s, climbed to engage. The bait flight dived, and the Zeros, tasting blood, followed them down. It was a swirling, chaotic melee over the bay. A standard P-40 flown by a pilot named Curly got a Zero on his tail. He dived, but the Zero stuck to him. "I can't shake him," Curly yelled. "Hold him steady, Curly." Bluey's voice cut through the static. "I'm coming." Bluey, who had been waiting high, dropped his nose. But he wasn't doing a standard boom. He dived past Curly, then pulled back on the stick with everything he had. His modified P-40 snapped around in a turn that defied physics. He went from a 400-knot dive to a 200-knot climb in seconds, pulling a blackout-inducing 8 Gs. The Japanese pilot, focused on Curly, didn't see him until it was too late. Bluey came up from below and behind, a position no P-40 should have been able to achieve. He opened fire from 100 yards. The Zero split in 2. All across the sky, the same story was unfolding. The pilots of the modified Kittyhawks were engaging the Zeros in their world, the turning dogfight. The Japanese pilots, among the best in the world, were utterly bewildered. Their entire tactical doctrine was based on one unshakable fact: Kittyhawks cannot turn. Today, they were. A pilot from 76 Squadron, seeing a Zero latch onto his leader, didn't dive. He hit his flaps slightly, a trick they'd learned, and pulled. The Voss tab engaged, and his P-40 slewed around. The Zero pilot, anticipating a wide, slow turn, flew right into his gun sight. The sky over Milne Bay was filled with burning Japanese aircraft. The bomber crews, seeing their escort disintegrate, panicked. They dropped their bombs harmlessly into the jungle and fled. The RAAF pilots landed, buzzing with a manic, victorious energy. They had met the best, fought them on their own terms, and thrashed them. They swarmed Voss, lifting him onto their shoulders, cheering his name. Jack Ticker Vossa, covered in grease and blushing furiously, had just changed the course of the air war in the Pacific. The victory was total. Of the 32 Japanese aircraft, nearly 20 were shot down. The RAF lost 2 planes. The Vostab, or as the pilots had nicknamed it, the Kanga Boost, was an immediate, unqualified, earth-shattering success. Squadron Leader Truscott's after-action report was a masterpiece of understatement and urgency. It is my duty to report a field modification to the elevator control surfaces, designated RAF VOS M1, implemented on 6 aircraft of this unit. Aircraft equipped with this modification have demonstrated a turn rate capability, estimated at 80 to 90% that of the Type 0 fighter, allowing RAF pilots to decisively engage and destroy the enemy in combat maneuvers previously considered suicidal. Request immediate dissemination of this design to all P-40 units in this theater. The memo set off a bomb. Voss and his exhausted ground crew worked 72 hours straight, modifying every flyable P-40 in New Guinea. A detachment of American USAAF pilots from the 49th Fighter Group, flying out of Port Moresby, flew down to see what the Aussies were on about. A grizzled American major, a man who hated the P-40, took one of the modified planes up. He landed 20 minutes later, his face pale. What did you do to it?" he demanded of Voss. "Just a linkage adjustment, sir," Voss replied. "Linkage adjustment? Sergeant, I've been flying P-40s since they were P-36s. They're pigs. What you have here, this ain't a pig. This is a goddamn racehorse." The Americans took the design back to Moresby. Within a week, the 49th Fighter Group was using it. The Kanga Boost spread like wildfire. Mechanics, using Voss's simple scratched-on aluminum diagram, were retrofitting planes on frontline strips from Guadalcanal to Darwin. High Command took notice. A telegram arrived from General Kenny, commander of the Allied Air Forces in the Southwest Pacific. It was addressed to Sergeant J. Voss, Ref. It read, "Your work is saving lives and winning battles. Whatever you need, you have it. Kenny." The engineers at Curtiss Wright in Buffalo, New York were less impressed. They sent a frantic red-bordered cable. "Unauthorized modification to aft control surfaces will void airframe warranty. Cease immediately. This mod induces dangerous tail flutter and risks catastrophic empennage failure." Truscott famously cabled back one line, "Your warranty is not a concern at Milne Bay. Ours aren't crashing, theirs are." The Voss tab was brilliant, but it wasn't perfect. It was a brute force solution. The pilots loved it, but they had notes. "It's a bit too good, Ticker," Bluey admitted over a cup of tea. "At 400 knots, you breathe on the stick and she wants to snap your neck." The innovation was now entering its second phase, refinement. Voss listened. The problem was that the boost was always on. It was too sensitive for high-speed cruising and gunnery. So he modified his modification. He introduced a gate. He added a simple shear pin and a secondary spring to his pushrod linkage. Now, during normal flight, the tab acted as it always had. The controls felt normal, but when a pilot was in a dogfight and hauled back on the stick with more than 30 pounds of force, the pin would shear, or the spring would compress, engaging the Kanga Boost. The pilot now had a 2-stage control, a fine-tuning gunnery stage, and a dogfight stage. It was the best of both worlds. The enemy, meanwhile, was in a state of profound shock. Japanese intelligence was scrambling. Their pilots were reporting that the Allies had a new fighter. It looked like a Kittyhawk, but it maneuvered like something else entirely, a P-40 Mark X. Intercepted Japanese briefings from Rabaul warned pilots, "Be advised, Allied K-Hawk is no longer to be considered an easy victory in a turn. Disengage, use vertical maneuvers, and do not allow them to engage in a horizontal fight." The psychological impact was devastating. The Zero pilots had lost their primary weapon, their arrogance. The fear that had plagued the RAAF pilots, the Zero phobia, evaporated. They were no longer the prey. They were the hunters. They developed new tactics. A Voss tab Kittyhawk would intentionally sucker a Zero into a turn, wait for the Japanese pilot to commit, and then snap around, using the boost to reverse the fight and get a clean shot. The hunter had become the hunted. On September 7, 1942, the Japanese ground forces at Milne Bay, starved, diseased, and beaten by the Australian Army, began to withdraw. The Battle of Milne Bay was over. It was the first time in World War II that a Japanese amphibious landing had been repelled. And everyone knew the RAF Kittyhawks had been the decisive factor. But success had a price. Squadron leader Truscott's new problem wasn't Zeros. It was his own aircraft. "Jack," he said, standing by a P-40 just back from patrol. "Look at this." He pointed to the tail. The metal skin of the fuselage, just in front of the tailplane, was wrinkled. It looked like rumpled paper. "Popped rivets," Truscott said grimly, "all along the rear spar. Your tab is working all right. It's letting these boys pull G's the airframe was never, ever meant to handle." Voss touched the warped metal. He'd seen this on racing cars, metal fatigue. "She's designed for 7 Gs, sir," Voss argued. "She was tested to 7 Gs. She's not meant to live there," Truscott snapped. "We're breaking our planes, Jack. This one," he slapped the fuselage, "is done. She'll never fly again. You've won us the battle, but you might lose us the war if we run out of aircraft." Voss had a choice. Recommend they remove the tabs or find a new solution. But the moral cost was far worse. A replacement pilot, fresh from Australia, arrived on September 10th. He was young, cocky, and had heard the stories of the miracle at Milne Bay. He was assigned a Kanga boost plane. His first patrol, he spotted a lone Japanese reconnaissance plane. Eager for his first kill, he dived. He was too low, too fast. He tried to pull out of the dive and engage his boost. He pulled too hard. The Voss tab engaged at over 450 knots. The G-load was instantaneous and massive. The P-40 didn't just turn, it disintegrated. The wings ripped clean off and the fuselage plunged into the bay. Voss saw it happen from the ground. He locked himself in the maintenance tent, refusing to come out. He was a mechanic. His job was to fix things. He had just killed one of his own. It was Bluey Johnston who finally got the tent open. Voss was sitting on a crate, his head in his hands, shaking. "It wasn't the tab, Jack," Bluey said quietly. "I killed him. It was too much." Malone was right. "No," Bluey said, grabbing Voss by the shoulders. "The war killed him. The kid was reckless. He didn't respect the machine. You gave him a sword and he fell on it. That's not on you." Bluey knelt. "Do you know how many pilots are alive right now because of that tab? I'm one of them. Curly's one. The whole bloody squadron. You can't save the fools, Jack. You can only save the ones who are willing to learn." Voss looked up, his eyes red. He had a new responsibility. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was an instructor. From that day on, no pilot flew a Voss tab Kittyhawk without a 1-hour ground school and a check ride with Bluey, where Jack Voss's first, last, and only instruction was, respect the machine, or she'll bite you back. The Kanga boost became the unofficial standard for every RAF and USAAF P-40 in the Southwest Pacific. The victories mounted. The kill-to-loss ratio, which had been dangerously close to 1-1, inverted. Allied pilots were now shooting down Zeros at a rate of 4-1, then 5-1. The P-40, once maligned as a flying brick, had become the terror of the skies. Jack Voss's contribution did not go unnoticed. He was awarded the British Empire Medal, BEM, for meritorious service and ingenuity in a combat zone. He was offered a field commission to flight officer. He turned it down. "With respect, sir," he told the air commodore, "an officer sits in a tent and pushes paper. A sergeant stays with the engines. I'm needed in the sheds." His true legacy was written in steel. When Curtiss Wright began designing the next final version of the P-40, the P-40N, a new feature appeared. The official design documents called it the Improved Elevator Control Assembly, featuring a modified, balanced tab system to reduce stick forces at high speeds. The engineers in Buffalo had, after much research, independently discovered the exact same principle Jack Voss had scratched onto a piece of aluminum in the New Guinea mud. His name was never on the blueprint. There was no Voss tab in the official parts manual. It was just a serial number. But in every RAF bar from Darwin to Borneo, for the rest of the war, pilots would raise a glass. They didn't toast the P-40. They toasted the Kanga boost. Goulburn, New South Wales, Australia, 1993. The workshop smelled of old oil, sun-baked dust, and warm steel. For 45 years, Voss Motors had been the place you took a tractor that wouldn't start, a water pump that had seized, or a ute that was running rough. Jack Ticker Voss, now 78, his famous ears softened by age, wiped his hands on a rag. He was listening. A young man, a historian from the RAF Museum, was sitting on a stool, a tape recorder running. "So the official records are spotty, Mr. Voss," the historian said. "The Americans claimed the servo tab was a Curtiss design, but we found Truscott's report. We found Johnston's flight logs. It was you, wasn't it? You're the man who made the Kittyhawk turn." Voss finished wiping his hands and looked at the historian. His eyes were still, clear and quiet. "The planes were good," Voss said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "The pilots were better. They needed a bit of help, a bit more. Leverage." "Leverage," the historian repeated, smiling. "Air Vice Marshal Johnston, before he passed, said you won the air war at Milne Bay with a drill bit and a bit of scrap. Is that true?" Voss walked over to a workbench covered in the guts of a carburetor. He picked up a spanner. "You see a problem," Voss said, weighing the tool in his hand. "You look at the system. You find the part that's fighting you, and you make it fight for you." He put the spanner down. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't genius. It was just a patch. A fix. The sort of thing any bloke would do to keep his mates alive. That's all it ever was. The historian looked around the dusty shop at this quiet, humble man who had tipped the balance of a world war and then simply come home to fix tractors. He realized he wasn't just talking to a mechanic. He was talking to the living embodiment of the ingenuity that had saved a nation. "I think," the historian said, turning off the recorder, "it was a little more than that, Jack. A little more than that." Voss just nodded, picked up the carburetor, and went back to work. He could hear a slight whistle in the fuel jet. It was out of balance, and Jack Voss couldn't abide a machine that wasn't in perfect tune.